Hello everyone, this is Mark. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the first real estate purchase that I ever made. It was a personal residence purchase, so I was planning to live in it, and I did live in it. But I did eventually convert it to a rental, and I still own it today. What the purchase did do for me is it gave me the confidence and the experience and the tax benefits in order to go out and buy more real estate. Now, whenever I'm talking to someone about a real estate deal, the two questions I ask are, how did you find the property and how did you fund the property? And in this case, the way I found the property was not that interesting. I will talk a little bit about how I chose the property. And I do think that you'll find it interesting how I funded the property, so I definitely will talk about that quite a bit. Now, if this sounds interesting to you, then hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and let's get started. Now, when I first moved to California, I knew that I wanted to get into real estate, and I also knew that paying rent was, to me, just throwing money down a rat hole, and I didn't want to do it. So I spent a lot of late nights watching late night TV, listening to the gurus talk about how to buy real estate with no money down, and a lot of their techniques were really outdated, and the purchase prices they were talking about didn't make any sense. They were Midwestern prices, and the prices in California were 4 to 5 times higher, or sometimes even more. So I did look in the papers a lot and got really depressed at the prices. So at the time, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment in this building in Whittier, California. It was an older building, but it was relatively well kept, and it was in a good part of town. The most important thing is that it was close to my work, so I could actually bike to work. At that point, I was very early in my career. I was a junior engineer, so I wasn't making a lot of money, but I didn't have a lot of expenses either. Since I was biking to work, my only real expenses were rent and food. When I was living in this one bedroom, I had picked up a flyer of a gorgeous condominium in Newport Beach. At that time, it was for sale for $250,000, which to me was astronomical. And I knew in my heart that I couldn't afford it. I wanted it, but I couldn't afford it. And I knew that. But I did keep the flyer, and I kept it as motivation to help me save that 60% of my income every month. So I was able to save about 60% of my take-home pay. So after about 2 years, I had about $15,000 saved up. At that point, I decided I had to try to go out and make something happen. The way that I chose the property was by process of elimination. So when I was trying to figure out where I wanted to live, I chose the property by a process of elimination. First, I eliminated the cities. I eliminated cities such as Newport Beach that I mentioned earlier that I knew I couldn't afford. I eliminated a couple of cities that I didn't feel 100% safe in. And then there were a couple of cities that I felt were priced like beach cities, but they weren't beach cities, so the value wasn't there. So at that point, it basically broke down to 2 cities, Huntington Beach and Garden Grove. So I went out and I talked to a couple of realtors who were willing to work with me, and they gave me a couple of properties to drive by. And eventually I narrowed it down to 2 properties, one in each city. The condominium complex in Huntington Beach was older and it was not quite as well kept, but it was about a mile from the beach, so that was attractive. The complex in Garden Grove was much nicer, it was newer, it was gated, it was very well kept, but it was about 10 miles from the beach, so it was quite a bit farther inland. Also, the zoning in Garden Grove seemed a little strange in that the complex was bordered by industrial places, auto parts dealers, auto parts wholesalers, restaurants. Then when you went about a block or 2 south, you started getting into heavier industrial. So I sort of looked at it as an oasis in the middle of the desert, because it was also surrounded by some older houses. But that's the complex that I eventually settled on. I did want a 2-bedroom, 2-bath because I figured that, one, the resale value would be better in that you could sell it to families. It's difficult, I think, to sell a 1-bedroom, 1-bath to a family because if they have children, then the children still have to sleep in the living room, and that's not great. So I definitely wanted a 2-bath, and I was able to get that in the Garden Grove complex. Also with a 2-bedroom, if I ever had a guest over, then they had a place to stay. They had their own dedicated room as well as their own bathroom. I eventually settled on this complex and this unit downstairs. It was priced for $128,500. It's now worth about $350,000. I'll talk more about the value increase from $128,500 up to $350,000 because it was absolutely not a straight line. There were a lot of zigzags up and down to get to that $350,000 number. It also rents for $1,900 and it's a very, very easy rental. Now, I just needed to find a way to pay for the property. I did have a few things working in my favor. I had a stable income. I was not hourly or commissioned. I was on salary. So at the end of the month, the bank knew exactly how much I was going to bring home in a paycheck. I also was in a stable industry. I had worked for the same company in the same industry for 3 years. The bank liked that too. I had pretty good credit. I had had a couple of credit cards and I paid them off every month and I made every payment. So the bank liked that as well. What the bank did not like was the amount of my salary each month. It was small. It was not enough to cover the mortgage. It was not enough to get a mortgage in the amount that I needed to buy this property. The bank worked off two simple calculations. They called them ratios, a front-end ratio and a back-end ratio. Basically, the bank wanted to know how much of your money was going towards your monthly living expenses, your housing, and then how much was going to your housing plus other debts. So they only wanted 39% of your take-home pay to go toward your housing expenses, in this case, the mortgage. And they wanted 43% to go toward the mortgage and other debt service. For me, those ratios were the same. I had no extra debt. I didn't have car payment. I didn't have a student loan. I didn't have credit card bills that I ran up every month. So my ratios were the same. Still, the bank wouldn't let me use both ratios the same. I couldn't push that 39% for the housing to 43%, even though I didn't have any other debt. I had to make the 39% for housing, and that was going to be a problem. The mortgage payment was just too big. So the realtors I was working with got me in touch with a mortgage broker who specialized in first-time home buyer programs. I had not owned any property, so I qualified for special programs for first-time home buyers. Now, many of these are handled by the state, not at the federal level. Also, many of them are funded on a year-to-year basis. So I recommend that if you're looking to get into a program like this, that you find a mortgage broker who specializes in first-time home buyer programs and get with them early in the year, because a lot of times the states will fund these programs in January and the money will be gone by April. I was lucky that I was able to get into the program, and what it did for me was it gave me what's known as a silent second. So that was a $30,000 loan that the bank got, but that I didn't have to pay. It accrued interest at a flat 3% rate, which at the time was fantastic, and the loan was due when I sold or refinanced the property. So that meant I only had to get about $90,000 on the first loan. That was something I almost could do, but again, not quite. So what the bank did was, because I had extra cash for my down payment from all the savings, they had me buy down the interest rate. So the interest rate at that time was 8.55%. Yes, it's true, interest rates have not always been below 4. They have been higher in the past, and they were for me. So that was a little bit of a sticker shock in terms of my monthly payment. So what I knew that I could make that payment because I'd already been doing it for 2 years. But for the bank, it's a different story if you're doing it on your own when you choose to do it versus when you've got an obligation to do it, and if you don't make the payment, then they're going to have to foreclose. The bank was not wild about that. So what they had me do was they had me buy down the interest rate. So for the first year, I bought it down 2 percentage points. So instead of 8.55% for the first year, it was 6.55%. Then the second year, I brought it down 1 point, so it was 7.55%. That made my payment quite a bit less the first year and a little bit less the second year. And then the third year, it would go up to the normal rate at 8.55%. The bank figured that I would get raises after the first year and the second year, and then that I would be able to handle that higher monthly payment, which I could and which I did. And that's how I got into the property. So I said I was going to tell you about that zigzag of the property value. After I'd been in the property for about a couple of years, I hadn't converted it to a rental yet. I was still living there. The homeowners association decided that they were going to sue the builder. Now these were technical violations of the building code. For example, it might be that the builder was supposed to nail the drywall to the studs on the wall, and he's supposed to have a nail every 12 inches and he only had one every 15 or 18 inches. Or he might supposed to or perhaps he was supposed to have 3 inches of insulation in the walls and only put in 2 3/4. They were violations of the building code, but no one would have really known. I don't even know how the homeowners association found out about it. But they filed a lawsuit against the builder, and the lawsuit went on and on and on. Now, it didn't affect me because I was living there and just making my payments, and I was happy living there. However, the lawsuit was a problem for any of the residents who wanted to sell their units. California has some very strict disclosure laws in terms of real estate. And what that means is anything that you as an owner know about the property, you have to disclose to a potential buyer. Normally these are minor things such as there were termites in the house previously that were treated, or there was a plumbing leak. Or, in this case, something that affects the whole community, like we're suing the builder for some building defects. So any person who wanted to sell their unit had to disclose to a potential buyer that there was a lawsuit against the builder. You might think that a lot of buyers might not want to buy into a complex where the builder was being sued. That's probably true, but that isn't even the biggest problem. The bigger problem is that the lenders didn't want to loan into that complex with the lawsuit in place because there's a lot of instability there. Who knows what's going to happen? So that made it very difficult for a buyer to buy, even if they wanted to. So what ended up happening was the people who wanted to get out or who had to get out, they just left. They vacated their properties and they gave them back to the bank. And since no one could buy, that was a circling the drain kind of thing that forced prices down and down and down. Eventually they settled at $60,000 per unit. That's right, less than half of what I paid. And the kicker was that the only units that were for sale by government entities, either the Veterans Administration, who had insured a VA loan, or HUD, Housing and Urban Development, who had insured an FHA loan. So the government was the only one selling and no one was buying. Now, at the time, I was thinking that that's probably a good deal. And in hindsight, I should have bought every single property that was available at $60,000. But of course, hindsight is 20/20. What did I know at the time? And my reasoning at the time was that I was involved in Arizona at the time. I had investments working there. I was still a pretty junior engineer. I didn't have a lot of cash to put down on these kind of properties. All that's true. But the other reason is that I was scared. There was no telling how far these properties could drop. Who knew where the bottom was? The bottom wasn't at 100, it wasn't at 80, it wasn't at 70. It did turn out to be 60,000, but I didn't know that at the time. So unfortunately, I did not even make an offer on one of those properties that was for sale at 60,000. Eventually the lawsuit was settled and the association got a little bit of money from the builder, and they made a few minor repairs of things that probably weren't a problem anyway, and the lawsuit went away and prices went back up. And now they're at $350,000. But again, not a straight line, up, then down, way down, then back up. And that's how I bought my first property. Next time I'm going to talk about how I bought my first investment property and where that is today. So I'm sure you don't want to miss that. So go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.